Hi Wes, how you doing?
Good, Mark. How you been?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you.
Good, good. We're staying really busy.
Have a background in startups or animal behavior?
Yeah, I can give you a little more background. I started off as an electrical engineer and then went back to school and got into biostatistics and did that for, oh gosh, so 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry. During that time, I got really interested in training my pet dog. That grew into working in a service dog program. I'm a volunteer. I've been for about 13 years in a service dog training program based in the penitentiaries here in Indiana. The inmates do a lot of the training, and then I did behavior modification and training and some teaching in that process. That was all as a volunteer. But my desire was to start my own company. And so Smart Animal Training Systems, my company, is my first startup. And the product Pet Tutor, I have a U.S. patent on that design. And so this is my first foray into the business world. I've always worked for somebody else.
The idea for Pet Tutor come about? Was it a light bulb moment in the middle of the night, or did you create it to suit a need that you had?
It's first of all kind of a blending of my two passions. I did a lot of work with training my own pet dog and then some other owners' pet dogs. My background is in engineering, as I mentioned, and it just blended those two things. But I would say the turning point for me to begin to seriously think about it was back in chicken camp. If I don't know how many of your viewers or listeners are familiar with Bob Bailey's Chicken Camp, but he is one of the premier, if not the premier trainer in the world today, training over 20,000 animals across 140 species. And I was just so inspired by the work that he's doing. And he had a staff of 50 trainers at any one time in his company. They did that for decades, training animals for television and military and you name it. But during that course, at one point, he said, he told us about the Spy Cat program, which was a project for the National Security Agency to guide cats into a position, and then they had a listening device on the cat, and they could guide this cat with ultrasound. And so the human couldn't hear it, but they could, like, let's imagine parking a little kitty outside the Russian embassy where two ambassadors are chatting away privately next to the kitty. So that was the idea of SpyCast, but to train them to be very solid in their behaviors, they used automation. So Bob told me that they used 500 electric feeders for their own internal purposes for various species to augment the manual training. At that point in the workshop, I said, oh gosh, somebody ought to invent that. Nobody did. So at one point then I decided to jump in. And it was also born out of what I perceive as the need in the positive training world. I'm a crossover trainer. I didn't like the force approach that I'd started with my own dog, and when I learned about positive, I love it. It seems it's the way to go in my mind. And there wasn't a lot of technology available. It was very limited for positive trainers. So my mission is now to bring smart technology to the positive training world.
How did you create the first prototype? Did you fashion it out of cardboard or something?
I should have brought my prototype. It's in the other room next door. It's a PVC pipe. It stands, probably, I don't know, 4 feet high, made out of actual pipe, like they run sewage through. I went to the hardware store, it was clean. I got it from the hardware store and hacked it together, and then got some electronics and wired that up. And then when it was ready to go I was still working full time doing neuroscience research at the time. So I hired a consulting firm to help me take it from a real rough prototype into a production unit that we have today.
How many years ago did you develop the first prototype, and what version or iteration are you on currently?
Yeah, the first prototype came out late 2012, early 2013. This is the PVC pipe version. And then we had a pretty good staff of engineers that jumped on it, electrical engineers, mechanicals, um, model builders. We had 3D printer equipment available, so we did a lot of that. We're the big flurry of activity lasting several months to almost a year. And software, we have embedded computers, so programmers, we were programming and testing, and I was learning all about, oh, how the heck do you, I used to work in manufacturing before the pharma industry. I was in the automotive industry. And so I know a little bit about manufacturing, but I'd never made, injection molded plastics and getting, larger volumes beyond just a prototype made. So I had to learn a lot. We import stuff from overseas. So some of our parts, everything is built in the US, but we import some of our parts that we make it from overseas.
So do you have a factory now, or are you still sort of putting them together at your house?
Yeah, now we've migrated out of the living room, but I have so it's kind of been a startup is not a linear path. There's these zigs and zags. Early on, I worked with contract manufacturers. Somebody that just turnkey, they do it all. And frankly, there were some hiccups along the way in working with them. I mean, it's nice that, they take care of everything. They order the parts, build it, test it, all that. But the costs go up. The cost to manufacture went way up. So we've transitioned from that. We worked in my living room for a little while to get more control over the process. And now we're back we've got a little warehouse office area. And we currently make those. There's a lot of hand building going on. We custom make some of the pet tutors.
Along your journey, have you bootstrapped the whole thing, or have you been able to fundraise, or have you even wanted to raise funds?
Well, I've fundraised in the sense of venture capital. No, I've shied away from that just because of the loss of control, and I have a vision about helping the field, the positive training field. Yes. And I'm not sure that a venture capitalist would necessarily share that vision, nothing against that. They're usually in for a quick turn on their money. And sometimes it takes more than a little while to get something going. So I've stayed away from venture capital. We did go to the bank for a commercial loan. So I've done that. And then personal investments from myself. I have a business partner, Amanda Hessel, is also a part owner in the company. I'm getting ready to add a third partner now who's an engineer. So it'll be 3 of us that own the company.
And for the software portion, do you contract that out, or do you have an in-house app developer?
I've done both, a contract out and in-house. First of all, I'm an engineer and I love programming. So maybe I should try to give it up, but I can't. So I do a lot of the programming, almost all the software in the feeder and in the main Pet Tutor, and in the remote is something I've written the software for. And then the app is something that we do contract out. So we have apps running on Android and iOS, and that programming work is contracted out. And I've used over the years different programming teams or groups or individuals to do that work.
And did you teach yourself how to program, or is it something you studied at university?
Well, yeah, it started back when I was in college, getting my degree in electrical engineering. So, I go back to the punch cards. If you remember punch card days, we were programming in Fortran on punch cards. So I started my programming experience there. And then as I got into the workforce as an engineer, I did programming. And then my work as a biostatistician, I did programming for statistical analysis. So I've had most of my career has been programming of one form or another.
As an entrepreneur in the pet industry niche, what would you say some of the major challenges that you have faced have been?
Yeah. Well, yeah, manufacturing is for sure one. And when you're making a hard product, not that I know that there are challenges on the software side because I do both. You know, we have software and hardware. It's tough. This is not true just for the pet industry, but the costs are pretty substantial when you start talking about injection molded tooling and you know, getting something at a production level, a piece of hard product, and then you have to worry about supply chains. You know, part goes obsolete. Well, what are you going to do? You've got to get that replaced pretty quick. So that's been a challenge. In the pet industry, you know, it's been a slow progression. When we got started, the segment that I think is becoming more common, the terminology is pet tech or pet technology. So I would say within the pet industry, we're in the pet tech segment. And when we started, there was almost nothing there. And today you go out and look at pet tech and it is all over the map, which I think is great. You know, we were very early in to that, and I anticipated that. That was another reason I started the business is for good motivation for my own passions, but also I felt the trend line was moving toward pet tech.
And if someone watching this discussion wants to be, let's say, a would-be pet industry entrepreneur, what kind of advice maybe would you offer them?
Yeah, well, it depends on the type of product again. So I think if you were doing an app, it's the capital investment up front would be much less. Of course, depending on what you're doing, you know, the platforms can get very elaborate on the software side. But I'd say, you know, an individual entrepreneur wanting to do an app is, you know, might be able to do it with just themselves or a couple of other people. Bigger platforms require more people. But that's a big stepping off point to decide, are you software only or are you hard? It's hard to make hardware. I suppose you could make hardware only. And there are challenges on both. If you don't have a background in manufacturing, you better know somebody that does. Because you can get lost pretty quick in the high weeds in the manufacturing side.
With respect to the pet tutor, with the timed feeding, are there any one or two top behaviors that you find trainers really love to use the pet tutor for?
Yeah, and I should just frame this too, as my vision has always been that we are building a platform of products. So the Pet Tutor Feeder is only one example of a part of the platform. And I have other things in the works that are either accessories around the feeder that work with it or completely separate products. So that's where I'd hope to get to. And my goal ultimately is to fill out this family of products. So the number of use cases will expand over time because of these additions. That's my plan. The use cases today involve separation anxiety would be a big one. And one of the advantages of the Pet Tutor, when we first started to think about the design for the Pet Tutor, I went out and talked to the users. That'd be another tip for anyone getting into this. Talk to people that are going to be using your product. You just can't do it in a vacuum. And one of the things they told us is, you know, if you're going to do it, it can't jam. We want something that I can put lots of different types of treats in and doesn't jam, and it's got to be quiet. And so it's super, super quiet. That fits in nicely for separation anxiety, because many animals with SA or separation anxiety are noise sensitive. And so that was a really nice feature that helped out a lot. And then barking, and especially in like a kennel operation. So we sell to individuals and to kennels. Several service dog programs have our pet tutors. And with the right protocols, you can reduce barking with multiple dogs, which is pretty challenging usually. So those are a couple. Crate training is another big one, to get the dog to go into the crate. And stay in. So with a Pet Tutor, you can trigger it remotely and make the crate a nice place to go. So separation anxiety, barking, crate training. We're starting to do more dog sports now, agility. We just recently introduced our Generation 3 product, which has dramatically increased the range. So outdoor things, we're starting to talk to people now, like in the um, hunting dog competitions. And that's an area where there's punishment used a lot. So I'm real anxious to get in there and give the trainers in that field some positive alternatives.
When you first went to market with the Pet Tutor, do you have one particular success story from back then when you were sort of wondering if you made the right move or not, developing the Pet Tutor, and then you got an email or something and a person telling you, "Thank you so much, you've changed my life"?
Well, yeah, change my dog's life would change mine. Yeah, that's what really fires me up every day. And we get those. And I like to work customer service, and that's where people are, they want, something's not working right or they don't understand. But every once in a while you get those people that I just want to tell you how much this has helped my animal. And man, that's a real charge. Barking, separation anxiety is a tough one. And often that can lead to you can't keep the animal. People have to give the animal up because it's destroying property, hurting itself. They don't know what to do. So we've had a number of those cases where someone says, thank goodness you were there. You really helped me turn this around. So barking, we have other cases in barking. We had a one service dog program. I don't want to mention the name, but they were about ready to release. It's for seeing eyes. For a guy, it was a dog that guided the blind, had made it pretty well through the program, had good skills, but couldn't ride in the car without barking its head off. Huh. And so they were using positive methods, and they couldn't figure out how to get the dog to quiet because you got to drive the car. Well, we put the Pet Tutor in the back with the dog, and they did counter conditioning on the car ride, and they were able to recoup that animal. Well, service dogs are $20,000 or $30,000 investment, and so that was a huge turnaround. So that made me feel pretty good that somebody that needed a service dog was going to got this animal, and it saved all the expense for this organization to get the dog that far along. And then I do work with a lot of work with behavior rehab and service dog programs. I've recently worked with one that that needed some behavior work, and I brought the Pet Tutor in to do that work and kept that dog with its owner.
Would you have any parting wisdom for potential pet industry founders? Maybe someone sitting at home and thinking about either developing a web-based platform or a product like you have.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's wisdom or not, but it will always take longer and cost a whole lot more than you think. And I don't care how much due diligence you do, you can always add to that. It's going to take longer. It's going to cost more. And so, on the cost side, I've been fortunate in being able to put in the capital when it was necessary. And companies can get to a certain point and things are going along swimmingly, and all of a sudden you need capital. And when you're on a growth curve, especially, you can't drop the ball at that point. So you got to be prepared to handle that capital need in one way or another.